Hello and welcome to Social Entrepreneurship, Entrepreneurship 331. I will be your professor. I'm Professor Chris Sutter. I'll just start by introducing myself. I'll get to know you a little bit more when we meet as a class for the first time. But just to let you know, I've got a wife and three lovely children. One of my dogs is hiding back there in the RV. We had an exciting summer this year. We bought an RV and decided to get as far away from I don't know, coronavirus, I guess, as we could. I'm recording this in August of 2020. And so we went out west and just hit a bunch of state parks and national forest land and spent a lot of time together in the woods and in the forests and the deserts in the RV. This is in Valley of the Gods. You'll see my boys there playing in the dirt. They love making roads and train stations and everything else. Eva's pretty happy there, looks like sitting in her chair. And I think those are Hallie's feet sticking out of the RV. I think she was probably reading a book. This Coral Pink Sand Dunes, another lovely state park out in southern Utah. Actually not that far from Zion National Park. This is up northern Utah, actually. This is Red Fleet State Park. And what's really cool about this one, aside from the lake, which is phenomenal, is there's dinosaur prints. There's like 300 tracks all over this sandstone block that leads into the lake. So it was a lot of fun to see the tracks and and swim around. You saw my red dog there. That's Jessie, and then I have another yellow dog, Luna, and she's actually the sweet one. Yeah, we stay pretty busy. My boys are real active. Their favorite mode of transportation is motorcycles. I have one. I'm working on fixing it. Actually, I have two. I've got one in Nicaragua that I use a lot. I'm sure I'll tell you more about that. These are not theirs, but they're excited to get one soon, they hope. Hallie, her favorite transportation may be the kayak. This was at some friend's house out in Oklahoma. Eva likes the hammock. That's probably her favorite transportation, but she's a big bike rider too. As I mentioned, there's my motorcycle down in Nicaragua. I do a lot of work down in Central America, a lot of research. My core research focus is entrepreneurship as a means of poverty alleviation. And so I've done some research on the dairy industry down in Nicaragua, training farmers and connecting them into larger supply chains. These bottom two ventures, one is a cooperative that's making cheese. It was connected to farmers. You can see here, this is cheese that they're making. And this other one was natural beauty products. This is in Managua, and I had a chance to interview the founders of that as well. And I've interviewed hundreds of entrepreneurs in developing countries. It's always fascinating to hear their stories and how they got started. Let's see, and so we will talk a lot more about that in class. This is some of the work I've done, just pictures. I've done a fair amount of research in India, several active projects there. A little bit in Africa as well, less, but I've been to Africa twice. If you're in Africa, you should definitely go see the lions. It was amazing. That was in Tanzania. So just to give you a quick overview of this class, entrepreneurship, as those of you, and I've seen a fair number of you that I recognize from my 201 class, entrepreneurship involves acting on an opportunity in the face of uncertainty in an effort to create future value. And hopefully, if you've had 201 before, some of those words really resonate with you at this point. The idea of action, the idea of uncertainty, and trying to create value. What we're going to add to it this semester is social. But what I want to highlight here is that the core definition of entrepreneurship really doesn't change a whole lot. This is all about, it's still about action in the face of uncertainty, and it's still about trying to create future value. But what we're going to do this semester is focus on a different sort of set of tools and ways of thinking about the world that are really focused on identifying and understanding social value creation. And on the first day of class, we'll have a long opportunity to talk about what does social mean. The one other thing I'll say before we jump into how the course actually works, if you have had my 201 class, this class is going to be a little bit different. It's going to involve a lot more reading, a lot more writing, and a lot more critical thinking. And not to say we didn't think critically in 201, we certainly did, but we're going to kick it up a notch. That's one of the goals that I have for this class. And while the reading and writing, well, I think that's a really good way to kind of push your critical thinking skills. And hopefully, if I'm effective this semester, you'll start to understand why critical thinking is so important for everything, but particularly when you're trying to do good in the social space. There's a lot of pitfalls and there's a lot of opportunities to do harm as well as good. And so this critical thinking piece is just can't overstate it enough. So in terms of the mechanics of the course, we'll be using Canvas as our go-to tool. That's where I'll post pretty much everything that you need. We'll use Zoom for class meetings. Turn those video cameras on. We'll do presentations. Anything else we'll do via Zoom. You'll see in the bottom, hopefully we'll also be in person. Again, I'm recording this in August, and I guess the final decision will be made early September. I believe it's September 7th. So hopefully I'll see you all face-to-face in 2046 FSB. But we'll leave the details on exactly how that'll work until we know a little bit more. We're also going to experiment at some points this semester with a shared whiteboard called Miro, and I will send you an invitation to that as the time for that approaches. But those are the basic tools. We'll try to keep it to that, to Canvas, Zoom, Miro to some extent. And then, of course, you can use any tools that facilitate your group work, things like Google Docs or Trello or anything else that you find useful is great. Okay. In terms of the actual kind of big picture of this course, the first week we'll have kind of an introduction. It'll be an overview of social entrepreneurship, what it means, what it looks like. Then we'll jump in over the next couple weeks to a theory of change, and we'll have our first sprint there. So the class will be, we'll have 3 sprints over the course of the class. And what a sprint means is that you'll be working in a small team, 4 or 5 people, to answer a specific question for a live partner. So if you've taken 201 or 401, those classes really built around building your own venture. This class is not. This class is built around, like I said, critical thinking, introducing you to some new tools and ideas and ways of looking at the world. But then also, it's not that we're setting the action aside, but what we're going to do is we're going to work with live partners. We're going to work with Cincy Tech, with Include Health, and with one other that I'm still finalizing the details on. So that first sprint will be a project around theory of change, which has to do with helping social enterprises really understand how it is that they go about creating social value. The second sprint will be around measurement. This becomes a very, very big deal in the social space, is being able to quantify or at least qualitatively describe what the actual impact, social impact of the venture is. We'll talk about funding, and then we'll have a third sprint around scaling, and that's where we'll work with Include Health to help figure out different pathways and strategies that they can use as they're trying to grow. And then the other thing that's going to be a little bit different this semester, this class, compared to at least 201 and maybe 401, is oftentimes you've got the big sort of group project due at the end of the semester or towards the end of the semester. We're actually going to front end load the group work. And so the last 2 weeks of class, rather than have a big project due, I'm going to have you read a book, The Second Mountain by David Brooks, and we'll talk a lot more about sort of applying these lessons to your personal life. And so you'll still have stuff to engage. You've got a final paper project, but hopefully it'll be a little more flexible and sort of just a different feeling than sort of the panicked last minute we got to prep for our presentations. So you'll have your presentations, you'll have to panic and prep for them, but not during the last 2 weeks of the semester. We're going to reserve that for something else. So that's kind of the big picture of what we're talking about this semester. Let me just talk about grades. I think it's important. Like I said, measurement matters. So in terms of the individual graded components, number 1 is course contribution. Again, if you've had me in 201, this is exactly the same. I want you to show up. I want you to be prepared every class. I want you to be a contributing member of your team at all times. I want you to have all the in-class assignments or the prep assignments done every time you show up for class. That's going to be really important. This class is only as good as we collectively make it. The second thing that I'm going to have you do are reflection papers. So each week you'll have a short reflection paper over the assigned readings, videos, podcasts, whatever else I have you, whatever material you prepare. And it's going to ask you to answer a specific question. So I'll tell you for the first week, the reflection question is something along the lines of, okay, so you're going to go in and start a project in Haiti in Cité Soleil that has to do with sanitation. What would you choose? Assuming you have any option, would you go in as a government project, a Haitian government project? Would you go in as a social enterprise, a for-profit project, a non-profit? So what would you choose and why? What are the pros and cons, and why would you select one? So it's those kinds of things. You'll have done the readings already, you'll have thought about these issues, and then essentially I'm asking you to kind of synthesize and apply what you've learned to a specific problem. These are a maximum of 1 page, 500 words, and more details can be found on Canvas. The one other thing, though, I'll say about the reflection papers, we're meeting on Fridays. Your reflection papers are due Wednesday at midnight. Let me reiterate that. We don't meet until Friday, but your reflection papers are due Wednesday at midnight because I need a chance to read them before we meet as a class. I want to know what you're thinking. I want to know what you're missing. I want to know where the gaps are. I want to know your insights before we meet as a group. So those are going to be due Wednesday night. Again, you'll have a series of other smaller assignments that are dumped into the course contribution score. Those are due Thursday night. So the only thing that's due Wednesday night are the reflection papers. Everything else in the class is due Thursday night, and then we meet, of course, on Friday. Then there'll be a final project. Oops, this is the details actually for the final project of 201. I'll talk more about the final project, but it'll be related to the book that we read. It'll be a personal project, much more focused on applying what we've talked about all semester to your own life. And that's where we'll sort of wrap up the semester. Team graded components. Again, the 3 sprints. I don't know why it says spring. Sprint 1, theory of change. Sprint 2, measurement. Sprint 3, scaling. Again, in each case, we're going to work with a life partner. They'll come in. They'll talk about their organization, their social enterprise on the first day. You'll have some time, not the first day of class, but the first day of the sprint. You'll have a couple weeks to work with your team, and then you'll make a presentation back to that organization a couple weeks later. And again, we'll go into much more depth when we meet together as a class and on Canvas. So, emergency exit. It's not too late to drop this class. If you're going to do it quickly. Make some space. There's pretty high demand for the ESP classes across the board. But I hope you won't. I hope you won't drop the class. And here's why. Let me talk about one social entrepreneur that I know. So Berly Morales lives in Guatemala City. I've known her since 2006, so 14 years now. And I bring her up because she's probably the best example of a social entrepreneur that I know. She's phenomenal. So she and her husband own a school in Guatemala City. You can see one of the neighborhoods their school serves in the picture there, the colorful picture. Oscar is a great guy. Her husband, he's the school bus driver and does some admin stuff and barely runs the show. Like, she is on it. She is in charge. She, excuse me, it's not coronavirus. It's a dry throat at this point. She has a long history of what I would call social entrepreneurship. I don't know whether or not she would use that term, and many of the social entrepreneurs you meet won't necessarily use those terms. But I'll give you one example. Excuse me. She started out her career as a teacher, and she was young. In Guatemala, you don't need a university degree necessarily to teach the earlier grades, and so she now has a master's degree. But at the time, she was young. She was 18, 19 years old. She had this little kid come to her class one day, and he was crying, and he was probably in first grade. She said, "What's the matter? Why are you crying?" And he looks at her and says, "Well, I have to quit school." She said, "Why? Why do you have to quit school?" And he said, "My mom came home drunk last night, and she ripped up all of my notebooks, and I no longer have any notebooks or anything I need, and I'm just going to have to quit." And in Guatemala, this is kind of the way it works. Like, if you don't have the supplies, if you don't show up, you just don't go to school anymore. But Barely saw this little boy with tears in her eyes, and she put her arm around him. She says, "No, it's okay. We'll get you some notebooks." And so she was making almost nothing as a teacher in these schools. And she took money out of her own pocket. They walked over to the store. They bought the boy some notebooks, and he was able to finish the first grade. So years and years later, she she was coming home from Quetzaltenango, which is where she's from, back to Guatemala City. And she's on the bus. And this is kind of before cell phones were ubiquitous. And so she didn't have a cell phone. And the bus broke down on the highway. It's about 4 hours from Quetzaltenango on the Inter-American Highway down to Guatemala City. So she's supposed to get in at like 6 in the evening, but the bus breaks down for hours. So her husband's supposed to come pick her up when the bus arrives. She'd called him when she left. But, you know, he shows up. It's 6, it's 7, it's 8. He has no idea where the bus is. He's thinking maybe she got home another way. He has no idea what's happened. And so he drives home, and they live quite a ways away. And so her bus finally shows up at about 1 in the morning. And it arrives in Zone 1. That's the major kind of bus depot area. Zone 1 is a bad part of Guatemala City. And one thing about Guatemala City you got to know is that the gangs are scary. There are a lot of gangs, the Mara Salvatrucha, 18, you know, Mara 18, Mara 13. They're scary, scary, scary gangs, and they run large parts of the city. She's been robbed many times. She's been kidnapped. I'll tell you that story sometime. Subject to extortion, you know, death threats. I mean, you name it. So she knows, you know, this is not good. She's got to walk a couple blocks from the bus station over to, over to the next bus stop where she can get a bus that'll take her into the part of the city where she lives. And so she's walking, and it's dark. It's 1 in the morning. And all of a sudden, you know, sure enough, she sees these 2 guys approaching her. And she knows the drill. She starts taking off her jewelry, to give to them. She's shaking. She doesn't, you know, you never know if they're just going to take your money or jewelry, or if they're going to kill you. And so she's shaking, and she's taking off her jewelry, and she's saying, please don't hurt me, you know, just take this. And one of the guys is covered in tattoos, and he looks at her, and he looks at her in the face, and he says, Miss Barely? And it was that same first grader from all those years ago. He put his arm around her, and he said, this part of the city isn't safe. And he walked her to the next bus stop, and then he waited for the bus to come. He got on the bus, he did some gang signs, and made it very clear to the bus driver that she was to be unharmed to her destination. And then he told her to take care. And this is just, you know, one quick example of all the miraculous things that have happened in her life. But she has spent, you know, her entire life dedicated to helping kids in this city. And she's helped hundreds of kids, thousands. Now she runs a school, and it's one of the best schools in the city. And it's a social enterprise. They use a cross-subsidization model where rich kids from rich families come there because it's the best school you can go to. And they're able to charge them, and then people who can't afford get put on scholarship, and they have all kinds of challenges, and we'll talk to them over the course of the semester, or talk about them a lot over the course of the semester. But Barely's just a phenomenal example to me of what you can do using entrepreneurial skills in an effort to create good. And why do I share this with you? Well, I don't know what your story is going to look like. I mean, you're already not growing up in Guatemala City, I assume. So it's going to look different than her story. But I'm hopeful that all of us can take something away this semester. All of us can look for ways to create social good, to create welfare, to be kind to others, and to do things that matter, and to use a skill set that I think is an incredibly powerful skill set to push positive kinds of change in the world. And so I'm excited for the semester. I'm excited to get to know you. I encourage you to start right away. We are going to hit the ground running, and I will see you very soon.